Tonight, the bailout plan goes down to defeat, and the Dow drops the most ever. We'll take a look at what happened in Washington and on Wall Street, and we'll take a close look at what could happen next. Plus, a live report from Asia to see how the markets over there are reacting to all that at the start of their trading day.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York City, this is Evening Edition on Bloomberg.
Hello, everybody. Mike Schneider here. Glad you're there. It is good to have you with us as we get underway on this Monday evening. And we begin tonight with action and reaction in a record-setting day on Wall Street. It all started when Congress took up the financial bailout plan. The House voted it down. That triggered a sell-off. The Dow had its biggest point drop ever, falling a little more than 777 points, triple sevens. And the S&P 500 had its biggest percentage decline since October of 1987. Crude oil tumbled more than $10 a barrel. And those seeking safe haven moved into gold and put gold over $900 an ounce. We have reporters in place all over the place on these developments this evening. And we begin with our Chris Valerio and the dramatic plunge in the equity markets today. Chris.
You said it yourself. It was a dramatic and historic day on Wall Street. We were down all day, but the action really started shortly afternoon. At 1:28 p.m., the House began its vote. Trading volume around this time slimming down as investors awaited a decision. Now, all around the floor, pods of traders gathered around TV screens to see what would happen. 15 minutes later, at 1:42 p.m., it began to look as if the vote would not go through. I remember clearly turning around from our booth, which is above the trading floor, and seeing traders just in shock. The most striking thing was that silence pervaded a normally ruckus room. People were standing, looking at the TV screens, looking up at the big board. At 1:46 p.m., as the reality of the vote set into place, the Dow suddenly dropped 705 points. It was at this point the volume really started creeping back into that market. Wachovia Bank began trading about 45 minutes later, and traders really sprung into action at that point. Now, while we did close off of the lows of this session, important to note that participation was in full swing by the closing bell. And at the close, there was nervous laughter, there was some booing, and many sighs. And the most salient thing, of course, Mike, was a lot of unanswered questions.
And those questions probably will continue into tomorrow. They're certainly continuing tonight. In fact, we want to know what's going to be going on the other side of the world. Today's developments in the U.S. with worldwide implications. And the biggest question of all, will the selling continue? A preview now from our Haslinda Aman standing by live for us in our Singapore newsroom. Haslinda.
Hey, Mike, we threw out Asia's decoupling story a while ago. The region's been tracking Wall Street, and it's no different this time round. Indicators suggest losses ahead. Now, here's what we have right now. The New Zealand market is the first to trade. It's already given up 4%. Looking at futures, the Nikkei futures in Chicago is at 11,300, but that's still more than 400 points below the last close, pointing to a likely 3 or 4% slide. Aussie futures down by about 7% at the moment. Now, weakness expected to come from financials. If we check the Asian banking ADRs, lenders like Japan's Mitsubishi UFJ Mizuho Financial and Australia's Macquarie, they slumped at least 6%. Remember that Mitsubishi is the bank that's buying 20% of Morgan Stanley for $9 billion. It's Japan's biggest lender. So Asia bracing for more losses for financials, which are down a third year to date. Among the worst performers in the MSCI Asian Index, they accounted for 30% of the tumble yesterday. Now, Mike, as the credit turmoil deepens, as Congress rejects the bailout, some investors are saying everyone is running for the hills. This is the worst of all outcomes.
Haslinda, before you go, give us a sense of perspective of the running for the hills and in terms of what the year has been and could end up being.
Now, let's stack up the losses for the year so far. It's not looking pretty at all. China leads the slump in the region. The CSI 300 index has plunged almost 60%, among the worst performers in the world. Now, the government had to intervene to boost investor sentiment. It's rebounded 18% since China said it would buy more shares in its biggest listed banks. And that's, of course, to shore up equities. Looking at the rest of the region, Vietnam's down 50% since the start of the year. And we're seeing at least a 30% decline for indexes in Hong Hong Kong, Singapore, as well as Taiwan. Mike, lots of concern about a further slowdown in emerging markets and a prolonged economic slump. That's it for the moment. Handing back to you.
All right, going to be a very busy day. Haslinda, thanks very much. And of course, she'll be standing by to help us get a sense of where things are going a little bit later in the broadcast as well. But we return back to the U.S. right now, specifically Washington. What really happened there today? Why did they bail on the bailout package? And what will Congress do next? Lizzie O'Leary has been on the job all day long at Capitol Hill and is standing by now with the very latest. Lizzie.
Well, Mike, the House will come back at 12 p.m. on Thursday. They're heading home for the Jewish holidays now, and this really was a stunning vote. Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, steered this bill to the floor. They were attempting to vote around 1:10 this afternoon, and they kept holding the vote open longer and longer to try to get the votes they needed. It went down 228 to 205. Pelosi just didn't have enough Republicans joining her from that side to pass this bill, or enough members of her own caucus really to make this bill pass.
The legislation has failed. The crisis has not gone away. We must work in a bipartisan way in order to have another bite at the apple.
But a lot of Republicans came out and said she wasn't bipartisan in a speech she gave just before she brought this bill to a vote, and that moment caused some Republicans who were sitting on the fence, who maybe thought they would go for this bill, they heard her speak and they just decided to defect.
I think that we need to renew our efforts to find a solution that Congress can support. I do believe that we could have gotten there today had it not been for this partisan speech that the Speaker gave on the floor of the House.
But let's set politics aside for a moment. We've seen these stunning drops in the markets today, and there's a question now. Will members go home and see their constituents? They are heading home, and will that dramatic drop we saw in the Dow today outweigh concerns about a bailout? We heard Secretary Paulson today say he and a lot of legislators here are going to come back and at least try to take another crack at crafting something.
We need to work as quickly as possible. We need to get something done. And I'm going to be continuing to consult with congressional leaders to find a way forward to get something done as soon as possible.
Now, the something remains something of an open question. Some Republicans and some Democrats are saying they should stick with the bill that was hammered out in these lengthy negotiating sessions this weekend. Paulson, in fact, endorsed that, saying, listen, we worked hard on this bill. We worked hard on it. We can probably round up a few more votes. There are other members, particularly in the House GOP, they say that some changes need to be made to bring those extra votes. It's about 13 votes on board to pass some sort of a bill. And then there's the option as well, Mike, that possibly the Senate would go first. There's less dissent among or sort of between the parties in the Senate. There's been more close negotiating between Chris Dodd on the Democratic side and Judd Gregg over on the Republican side, so it's possible that they could try to run something out of the Senate before they brought it back to the House, Mike. But everybody is watching the markets and trying to figure out whether we're going to see more drops and whether that might spur another round of negotiating or perhaps another pass at this bill, Mike.
Lizzie, at this point, are they willing to, the House Republicans especially, willing to simply say, give us a little change, give us something that we can at least take home and say, make it look like we won something out of this, and get have Pelosi go back on the floor and make nice? Would that be enough for them?
It might be, and that's really where the devil's in the details right now. I spoke to Senator Lindsey Graham over on the Senate side. He said John McCain, who is one of his closest allies in the Senate, is calling a lot of House Republicans, and they're trying to figure out what might need to happen in order to coax out that extra group of 13 votes from the House Republicans, possibly whether there be some changes on accounting, mark to market. There's some things they might get a little movement there, Mike.
All right, Lizzie O'Leary, great job, a busy day, and I suspect you're going to continue to be busy throughout the rest of this week. Take a break. Back in a couple of moments. Take a look at what history has to offer us and examples about all this. We'll be right back.